It's been 6 months since cash bail was eliminated in Illinois. How are police and prosecutors adjusting?
Our overtime hours have increased significantly.
But the county jail is not nearly as full as it has been. That's coming up on WGLT's news magazine, Sound Ideas. Good evening, I'm John Norton. Also on today's show, a scholar coming to ISU explains how police departments have become increasingly militarized.
Local police departments could get military surplus equipment, so they get these MRAPs, they get all these grenade launchers.
And students at a Bloomington school really like to play chess and to win.
I just feel really happy, ooh, I just got a really good move, and I feel like I'm just going to win the game now.
The school set a new state record for success. Those stories follow a Bloomington Normal News update just ahead. This is Sound Ideas on 89.1 WGLT and WGLT.org, part of the NPR network.
Support for WGLT comes from Bloomington Normal Audiology. Here My Story continues with local patients Ralph and Carol Weisheit.
I was actually going to add that was one of the reasons that you went, was because I kept saying, you're not listening to me.
And she thought it was my hearing, yeah.
See what I got to live with?
Ralph and Carol's full story can be found at bnaudiology.com.
From the campus of Illinois State University in Normal, this is WGLT's news magazine, Sound Ideas. Good evening, I'm John Norton. The elimination of cash bail brought change to every step of Illinois' criminal justice system last September. It's been nearly 6 months since the Pretrial Fairness Act became law in Illinois. Criminal justice advocates cheered the new law, saying that a person's financial means should not be a barrier to freedom as they await trial. Law enforcement generally took a more critical view. WGLT's Lindsay Jones has more on what those changes look like here in McLean County.
The Pretrial Fairness Act went into effect on September 18th, ushering in a series of sweeping changes at nearly every level of the criminal justice system. From how or whether people are arrested, released, or held, it's all been impacted by PFA. For some counties, these changes came as a culture shock. This is McLean County Sheriff Matt Lane.
There are some counties that didn't do much of anything, and they were scrambling when this first came about. And they may not have that type of relationship with all the parties involved.
But here in McLean County, the shift wasn't nearly as jarring. Lane says that's due in part to collaboration between various branches of the criminal justice system locally, who came together and mapped out how things would work well in advance. Among the concerns were ensuring that people would actually show up for their court appearances if released.
We got to start getting together a year in advance, 6 months in advance anyway, to plan this out and how we were going to do it with the judges and all the participating parties. And it really did make things much easier and run a lot smoother.
Lane, like other McLean County law enforcement officials, reports the increased workload is among the biggest noticeable changes. With cash bail off the table as a means of determining whether a person remains incarcerated while their legal case proceeds, the law requires a hearing be held within 48 hours of a person's arrest. That's resulted in increased workloads as both prosecutors and police work to quickly gather and complete reports and other paperwork used in those hearings. Judges are tasked with determining whether a person qualifies for pretrial release and under what conditions they will be released. Some offenses, like violent crimes or felonies, disqualify a person from pretrial release. Judges weigh evidence from prosecutors and defense attorneys before deciding. Here's Bloomington's Chief of Police, Jamal Symington.
Our overtime hours have increased significantly, especially for homicides, for instance, because those reports have to be done before that person goes before a judge to determine whether he or she will be detained.
Symington says that's created needs that have not been accounted for in the city's police budget yet.
So I've had officers having to work double shifts, sometimes just to get reports done for those violent crimes. So that becomes problematic at times, but we know that's part of it.
Symington adds that when the city moves into a new budget cycle, the overtime needs will be reflected accordingly. But with just 6 months of no cash bail being in effect, he says more data collection is necessary to determine what the new ask will be. Both Twin Cities police chiefs say training for the Act's new requirements was among the largest challenges, in part because of how much was needed. Here's Normal Police Chief Steve Petrelli.
That was a lot of work on the state's attorney side. I'd like to give the state's attorney credit, specifically Brad Rigdon down at the state's attorney's office did a lot of work getting our officers prepared, holding training sessions, working through problems, scenarios that could come up.
Petrelli says the department even made flowcharts to guide officers through administrative changes.
If it's A, you go this route. If it's B, you kind of go this route. And once you learn those things, it becomes kind of like second nature. But really the timeliness of the reports and then learning the flow of how you handle certain offenses now so it's in accordance with the act. And that was really just a training issue.
Bloomington Chief Jamal Symington says the new rules behind no cash bail were a greater adjustment for some of the department's more experienced officers.
The officers, especially the veterans who've been working a different system for 20 or more years, had concerns and policy-wise. So we knew it was important to amp up the training to make sure that they were comfortable when the switch happened.
Both Bloomington Normal police chiefs say they believe officers have adjusted to the new system well. And with fewer criminal offenses qualifying as detainable under the new law, the amount of people jailed at the McLean County Detention Center has dropped since September, as predicted. Sheriff Matt Lane says the jail now averages 25 fewer inmates a day.
We were sitting usually around 200 people, 200 inmates at the beginning of this. Now we're around 175. Is pretty steady.
Public Defender Ron Lewis says the PFA's changes have been particularly important to clients who appreciate the ability to continue going to work or taking care of other responsibilities while a legal case is pending and they are presumed innocent, instead of remaining in jail until enough bail money is raised. On the administrative and prosecutorial end, State's Attorney Erica Reynolds says her office has had to adjust how some of its support staff works. Reynolds says so far the office hasn't had to hire additional staff as a direct result of the Pretrial Fairness Act. With reporting from Edith Brady-Lunny, I'm Lindsay Jones.
Before September, Illinois followed a pattern seen in other states where jails held mostly pretrial detainees who are presumed innocent. Statistics on how the Pretrial Fairness Act has impacted jail populations and court systems statewide are being compiled by Loyola University in Chicago. Coming up a little later on Sound Ideas, hear how police departments have become increasingly militarized, though it's not an entirely new concept. Listen in 8 minutes.
It's been a year since Silicon Valley Bank et al. Collapsed. So how much time does banking need to figure out what comes next? We'll talk about that next time on Marketplace.
Listen to Marketplace beginning at 5:30 this afternoon on WGLT, sponsored by Sefcu.
Oh, shucks, you ain't making me. I has to go down the river.
I know, Huck.
Huckleberry Finn, that classic American character created by Mark Twain, travels with a man fleeing slavery. A new novel tells Jim's side of the story.
I'm writing the novel that Twain was not ill-equipped, but unequipped to create.
Percival Everett on his novel, James, tomorrow on Morning Edition from NPR News.
I'm co-host Dave Martinez. Join us for Morning Edition weekdays from 4 to 9 a.m. on WGLT.
This is Sound Ideas on WGLT. The chess teams at Evans Junior High in Bloomington has done something that has never been done before in state history. Its 6th, 7th, and 8th graders have all won state championships in the same year. As part of our occasional series called More of That, Please, WGLT's Charlie Slinka reports on the dominant showing.
66 Illinois junior high and middle schools sent teams to this year's state tournament that filled the Peoria Civic Center. Chess parent Dana Kirby says it's something to behold.
You have tables the size of, 10 boards wide, and there's thousands of kids there and games that were lasting the entire time.
They played 8 rounds over 2 days. It's not like Evans Junior High is new to this. The 7th grade team won last year. To sweep all 3 grades, though, is unprecedented. And it's not just Evans. Chittix Junior High and Normal finished 2nd among 6th graders and 3rd in the 7th grade section. Evans chess coach Barry Bridget says the entire community is strong most years thanks to a network of teams.
I think it starts at the elementary level. Like Benjamin Elementary has just an excellent feeder program. It goes early on, so it just grows throughout the county.
Most of the Evans players take the game very seriously indeed. Dana Kirby says her son likes the team aspect and hanging with other smart, funny, clever kids. He likes being part of a group that wins, but she says he's also invested in the game itself.
He is the kid that is going to walk around with his phone in his hand, not looking at videos. He's playing chess all the time.
Another committed player on the 6th grade team is 12-year-old Sanchit Gupta.
In chess, you have to have a good IQ and you use your mind. and you can focus like really hard on a game.
Gupta says he plays chess online a fair amount. He lives for finding just the right thing to do on the board.
I just feel like really happy, like, ooh, I just got like a really good move, and I feel like I'm just going to win the game now.
Sanjit says he plays standard openings mostly. Sometimes he'll throw in a lesser seen opening that is tactically sharp.
I like the Scandinavian because people usually fall into it, and then I could just get a better opening.
For a lot of players, chess is casual, something to do after school. Coach Barry Bridget says with this group, he could tell the first day it would be something special.
When they get to chess club, all they want to do is play chess the entire time we're there. And when you're at the state tournament, in between rounds, we bring, 20 boards with us. And if they're not in the tournament playing, they immediately come back to the Skittles room, and then they're playing more chess, so they don't stop.
Bridget has coached basketball, football, all kinds of sports. He says chess players are just like any others who excel.
The determination and the work ethic. I mean, I see what they do. I see how they're thinking, and they talk to each other. They talk about strategies. Why you did this. They put the work in, and they come eager to put the work in too.
Bridget says he has the 8th graders play and teach the 6th graders every week in practice. They're good mentors.
They all just want to get better together, which is one of the really cool things about the group. Like, they really do just do everything for each other.
Vamsi Munaganuri is one of those 8th graders. He's been playing for 8 years. He got into it because some of his friends played, but mostly because an elementary school teacher told him to join and see how it went.
It was pretty fun for a few days. It's with my friends. We just laughed around. And then I started playing for my school, and then we slowly started winning.
So is it the winning or the beauty of the game itself that's the attraction?
Well, it's both, I guess. If you win, you want to play again, if you ever win. So, that's how I play again and again. If I lose, I just lost my urge. So, I guess it's mostly the winning.
And Munaganuri has won a lot. He has topped the field all 3 years at the state tournament. No losses, no draws, undefeated. The first year was easy because there were a lot of beginning players in his division. This year, he was top-rated. Munaganuri says last year was tougher because he had to beat higher-rated players, including a ranked master. It can be stressful when you're at the board and time is ticking away. When you get nervous, Vamsi says, it's hard to think.
I sometimes will go into the game way too much, that when I'm against the lower rated and it's equal and I'm running out of time, I just start shivering all of a sudden. I honestly think it's a problem sometimes. But right after the game, it ends.
Munaganuri says he tries to manage his energy in these moments. He'll get up, go to the bathroom, get a drink of water, or take a mental break to recharge in the middle of the game.
That's all you can do, honestly. Sometimes you can just walk away from the board, look at other friends' games, or just random boards you can see, and then just forget the game for a while, and then come back and then look at it with a fresh mind.
But over the board, he says the world mostly goes away.
Time goes through really fast. People get shocked when I tell them my games sometimes last 4 to 5 hours. And I'm when you're playing, you don't feel that time going away.
Even in 8th grade, Vamsi is in the top 30% of all U.S.-rated players. He dreams of becoming a grandmaster. Now, any coach manages the emotions of players and tries to teach what Munaganuri already grasps. Barry Bridget says when a kid is down after a tough loss, coaches console. They try to keep it light and loose. He tells them not to worry about winning or losing, but about playing and having fun. This works, sometimes. In the late rounds of a tournament, when a team is in contention, it can get a little tense. You might think the older kids would feel it more. After all, the younger ones are there just to play and have fun, right? Not competitive so much. Bridget says this year, no, that was wrong.
Honestly, the 6th graders were they were a little bit more on edge. The other guys had been there and already won state championships and stuff before, so it was old hat for the 7th and 8th graders this year. The 6th graders, they knew they were with the state champions, so I think they put a little bit more pressure on themselves.
This year, all 3 contests were squeakers. Evans won by just half a point in each grade. One skinny little draw's difference.
Well, on the way out this year, I had about 3 different people be like, hey, we're going to get you next year. So I think what we've done the last 2 years with the program, put a target on our back.
The Evans state champion teams got a welcome home from the tourney. They got a trophy walk through the school. And next year, they'll go back to not just having fun with chess, they'll compete. I'm Charlie Schlenker.
Oh, and one more thing. A runner-up in the 8th grade individual standings at state. Pragran Mirsuch was also from Evans Junior High. Tomorrow on Sound Ideas, we'll profile several of the women who have shaped Bloomington Normal through their work in government and the legal system. That's tomorrow on this show, Sound Ideas. I'm John Norton. Some people worry about the militarization of police agencies today as tactical units, automatic weapons, body armor, and armored vehicles called MRAPs proliferate to cities across the nation. A noted scholar who will appear at ISU says that's really nothing new. Julian Go is the Bone Lecturer this year. Coming up March 28th at ISU, the University of Chicago professor is the author of the book, Policing Empires, Race, Imperialism, and Militarization in the U.S. and Great Britain. In this interview with WGLT's Charlie Schlenker, Go says the militarization of law enforcement has been going on since the dawn of modern policing.
The real first modern police department is the London Metropolitan Police in 1829. And this is the model of the civil police, as it was called, that then the United States emulated. Before this, we didn't have police departments. You had watchmen, often volunteer. You had constables, and they were all separated locally. They didn't really have any organization. And so this idea of a modern police department that we live with today, that we have, it just didn't exist in the 19th century until the London Metropolitan Police. What you had was the first full-time police officers in a single centralized department. And what made it militaristic was the founders of this department decided to copy these military colonial police forces, particularly in Ireland and elsewhere. The police suddenly were uniformed or were hierarchically organized under officers, like sergeants. That title was borrowed from the military. And militarization doesn't just mean that you borrow military weapons. It's the whole organizational copying and culture and mindset.
You've talked about successive waves of militarization, though. How did it progress?
Over time, there are these moments when the police turn to military and colonial and imperial forms, and what's borrowed kind of varies depending on how much available at the time. But in the big picture, you've seen an accumulation of militarization.
You call this an effect of the imperial boomerang. Unpack that, would you?
Yeah, so when these police look to the military, they're specifically copying forms that were occurring in the colonies, in Ireland, in the Caribbean, in the United States in the early 20th century would be U.S. colonial Philippines. These are forces that have been developed to control populations, colonial populations, to not only prevent crime, but also more particularly to prevent insurgency and rebellion. So by boomerang, we go abroad to conquer new colonies and new lands and occupy them. And then it comes back, right, in the form of these militarized ways of dealing with population. And so what we do abroad in colonial sites and the peripheries of empire, such as in Vietnam, these tactics and forms that are developed for those sites then return back and are used on domestic population by the police.
How did this pattern become inflected in the case of slavery and post-slavery?
In slavery, what the police did was they borrowed from and imitated certain things of the slave patrols. The slave patrols were in the American South and the British Caribbean, and these were essentially forms of policing. Just to take one example, when the London Metropolitan Police were created, they copied the slave patrols system called the beat system. Some people might know about the police beat system, where you have an officer walking around a certain neighborhood, a territorially defined area. The London Metropolitan Police copied that from the slave patrols, which also had their own distinct beats, right? They would cover certain territories near and around the plantation, and they would make sure that the slaves were under control. They would inspect slave dwellings for weaponry. They would make sure slaves weren't having mass meetings. This kind of territorial-based control was a crucial part of the slave patrol. And these police officials, when they created police departments, copied that kind of style.
You're also writing that each wave has been triggered by the racialization of crime and disorder. Race and imperialism are intertwined, but not necessarily the same thing. So where's the nuance there?
Race and imperialism are not the same thing, but imperialism and colonialism nearly everywhere, particularly in the cases of the U.S. and Britain that we're talking about. Imperialism and colonialism were always justified on racial grounds. The justification for conquering the Philippines and for the United States ruling them, for example, the justification for the British ruling India, and so on and so on. It was always that these peoples are racially inferior. They need the control and regulations by their supposedly superior white race. And so similarly, when historically, the police have adopted from these colonial forms when the imperial boomerang, in a sense, comes back. The justification was typically, well, we need these militarized forms of control. We need these weaponry to deal with the savages in our midst, in our streets. So there was a racialized language there, too.
How did the racialization of the anti-immigration movement in the late 1890s through the 1930s inflect policing in America?
All of these immigrants, of course, are coming over in the U.S. There's mass migration. And it's not only immigration from, say, Europe. It's also mass migration of African Americans from the South to the North cities. It's in the West, Asian populations moving around towards the cities. And what this created was a fear of crime among white populations in these cities, that, oh, these immigrants and these migrants are coming and they're creating all this crime. It's a familiar narrative and rhetoric that we know from discussions of immigration today. And it struck fear into these officials. And then they then said, well, okay, well, we got to deal with this. How are we going to deal with this? Well, we have to strengthen policing. And the way they thought to strengthen policing was turning to the methods and tactics that had been developed overseas to deal with the colonized people overseas. The racialization, as we sociologists call it, the racialization of crime and disorder, where you think about crime and disorder as coming from particular racialized groups, in this case, immigrants and migrants, that then justifies bringing the boomerang home and justifies the police adopting these military forms and tactics. And that's exactly what so many police departments did in the early 20th century. They created some training programs, copied after the military. They adopted military techniques such as pin mapping to identify insurgents overseas, and they adopted that for crime, and a whole series of basically copying what the military were doing overseas.
Today we're having debates about how prevalent automatic weapons should be among police forces, or whether police forces should have what amounts to tactical vehicles or semi-armored vehicles. Where does the arc of this level out or decline?
There was criticism of local police departments getting surplus military equipment. During the Clinton era, especially and up through basically 2016, basically up through Obama, there was a policy called the 1033 program by which local police departments could get military surplus equipment. So they get these MRAPs, they get all these grenade launchers and all this equipment. And that was a consistent practice. But there have been criticisms, in fact, both from the left and from the right. The Republican Senator Rand Paul criticized this in 2015 onward. Other folks, of course, the Democrats didn't like it. And so there have been criticisms. There have been bills introduced to stop this program. There have been attempts to stop this. Part of the problem is that the police already have all this equipment, right? So stopping future transfer is one thing, but actually there's no talk about removing what the police already have gotten over the past decades.
That is Julian Gold, this year's Robert Bone Distinguished Lecturer. He's the author of Policing Empires, Militarization, Race, and the Imperial Boomerang in Britain and the U.S. The speech will be March 28th. He spoke with WGLT's Charlie Schlenker. And that's Sound Ideas today. WGLT's news magazine is made possible in part by Bloomington Normal Audiology. I'm John Norton. Story help today from WGLT's Charlie Schlenker twice and Lindsey Jones. Ryan Toohey edits Sound Ideas. This is 89.1 WGLT and WGLT.org, part of the NPR network.